For a solid quarter of a century, one political movement had Venezuela in an iron grip. But then, in the very first days of 2026, it all just came crashing down. So today, we're going to break down how one of the world's most dug-in autocratic regimes finally collapsed.
So let's set the scene. The date is January 3rd, 2026. This is a day that's going to be remembered for a long, long time. The moment everything changed for millions of Venezuelans, whether they were inside the country or scattered across the globe. Yeah, that quote just perfectly captures the weight of this moment, doesn't it? We are talking about the end of a whole era, one defined by crisis, by a massive exodus, and by authoritarian rule. But the big question is, how did we get here? Well, the story of the end actually starts about 18 months earlier. It all kicked off with an election. One the regime thought it had completely under control. But wow, did it spiral into the single greatest challenge to its power they had ever faced. So the regime did what authoritarian regimes always do. They banned their most popular opponent, María Corina Machado, from even running. It's a classic move. But they did not count on her next play. She threw all of her political capital, all of her support, behind a quiet consensus candidate, a diplomat named Edmundo González, and basically turned him into a symbol of national unity overnight. And this is where the story just takes a massive turn. On election night, the government's electoral council, the CNE, comes out and declares Nicolás Maduro the winner. No big surprise there. But, and this is a huge but, the opposition had done something absolutely brilliant. They collected the actual physical tally sheets, the Actas, from more than 80% of polling stations. And those pieces of paper, they told a totally different story. Just look at these numbers. This is what's so incredible. The paper trail proved that González didn't just squeak by with a win, he won in an absolute landslide. We're talking more than double Maduro's vote count. The fraud wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It was undeniable, it was documented, and it was out there for the whole world to see. So you'd think with that kind of evidence, the regime would back down, right? Nope. They just doubled down hard. Maduro went ahead with an illegitimate inauguration with only a handful of his allies showing up. And then he unleashed this brutal wave of repression called Operation Toon Toon. It's named for that terrifying sound of the secret police knocking on your door in the middle of the night. While the regime was laser-focused on crushing dissent, the economy was in a complete and total freefall. By 2025, inflation hit a staggering 275%. And look, that's not just a statistic. That's a daily grinding nightmare for every single Venezuelan. And that economic collapse had a devastatingly human cost. You had over 2,000 people thrown in jail for political reasons. People's life savings just completely wiped out in weeks. And that historic migration crisis, which was already the biggest in the hemisphere, it just started speeding up all over again. Okay, so this brings us to the real heart of our explainer today. Because, let's be honest, this regime had survived huge crises before. It had weathered massive protests, sanctions, international pressure, you name it, they'd survived it for years. So the big question is, why now? What on earth was different this time? After all those years of clinging to power, why did the whole structure suddenly just give way in early 2026? Well, the answer is a perfect storm. A convergence of three critical factors that came together and did what years of pressure never could. Let's break these down one by one. First, there was a major shift in U.S. policy. Second, something we're calling the Nobel Effect. And finally, and maybe most importantly, a deep internal fracture within the regime's most critical pillar of support. First up, the U.S. policy shift. After that stolen election in 2024, a new administration in Washington basically said, you know what, the old way isn't working. So they switched from just pressure to what they called maximum impact. They brought back powerful sectoral sanctions, the kind that target entire chunks of the economy, and that effectively choked off the regime's last real lifeline, its oil money. The second factor was this massive shot in the arm for the opposition's international legitimacy. When María Corina Machado won the Nobel Peace Prize in October 2025, it was so much more than an award. It became what people called a global shield. Suddenly, the world's attention was fixed on her and on the fight for democracy, and it made it politically impossible for other countries to just look away from the repression anymore. And that brings us to the third and, perhaps the most decisive factor of all. Just look at this number, $1.10. $1.10. That was the official monthly minimum wage in Venezuela by early 2026. And that right there, that was the final crack in the regime's foundation. For years, Maduro kept the loyalty of his top generals through corruption. But you cannot feed an entire army on $1 a month. The lower and mid-ranking soldiers, their families were starving, just like everybody else. Their loyalty wasn't just tested, it completely evaporated. So, with its money gone, its international credibility shattered, and its own military support crumbling from the bottom up, the stage was officially set for the final act. On that fateful day, a U.S.-led operation targeted the regime's inner circle. Nicolás Maduro and his wife, Cilia Flores, were captured to face a whole list of international charges, everything from drug trafficking to crimes against humanity. And just like that, the regime, without its head, collapsed within hours.
The global impact was instant. Oil markets immediately started reacting to the idea of Venezuelan oil coming back online. For the first time, there's real hope that the region's massive migration crisis might actually begin to reverse. And of course, the monumental task of rebuilding an entire nation from the ground up is just getting started.
The transition to democracy is now underway. And it's being led by the man who actually won the election 18 months before, President-elect Edmundo González, with María Corina Machado right there by his side.
Look, the road ahead is going to be incredibly difficult. I mean, dismantling a criminal state and rebuilding an economy from nothing is a historic challenge. But the fundamental question in Venezuela has changed. For the first time in a generation, people are not asking if they will be free. They're asking, what are we going to build with that freedom? A new chapter has truly begun.